Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Lewis, Professor of Communication and Dean of the Faculty of Applied Sciences here at Simon Fraser University. And welcome to the third annual Leonardo Lecture. Incidentally, the same talk will be given tomorrow on the Burnaby campus. I don't have the room number, but you can Google it, at 3:30. And Corey will be signing books in cooperation with Sophia Books in the lobby after this presentation. I got to see Cory Doctorow for the first time in person at a conference called Digimart on new media in Montreal a few months ago. Along with a bunch of other people I think are really pushing the envelope of what it means to be a media distributor and producer in the age of the internet and new media, including the two guys from that commune in Maine who made the YouTube's Mento piece, and a local Vancouver actor and director who produces Tiki Bar Cafe. I think one of Corey's seminal ideas for me goes something like this. This is from an interview he gave, a telephone interview he gave with Georgia Strait. He said, "The copyright law isn't to encourage entertainment giants to sue people. The point of copyright is to encourage diversity in communication and cultural participation." Well, that really stands it on its head, doesn't it? The way we understand stuff is by making it. As an award-winning Canadian novelist, I'm here to tell you that my first stories were written by taking books that I liked and ripping them off. There at the age of 12, we call that culture. There isn't a painter who didn't start by repainting the paintings of the painters he loved. Corey's talk at Digimart really helped me think differently about intellectual property and digital rights in the age of new media. I'm working right now on digital rights with a doctoral student in communications called Mira Nair, in the audience somewhere. And I was able to come back from Montreal and approach Mira's work with really a new perspective. I was better able to understand what she's been arguing with me about for the last 2 years. This doesn't often happen. I wouldn't call it an epiphanous moment exactly, but it certainly was an envelope pusher. I thought to myself that I would love to provide for my students and for the local community more interface with Corey so we could all learn more about the area in which he's become an expert and quite a provocateur. I especially want to thank Barry Shell, who's sitting down here, for making this ambition possible in the context of our third annual Leonardo Lecture. So you've seen the media, you all know about Corey, but you probably don't know anything about Leonardo, so I'll just spend a minute to talk about it. Well, Leonardo you know, not the Institute. The Leonardo Institute provides a variety of novel, interdisciplinary forays that look at new emerging technologies and how anticipated policy or societal changes might shape the way those technologies evolve and how those evolving technologies might shape society. One part of the Institute is the Leonardo Summer Institute for PhD students who come to it from across a wide variety of disciplines from engineering to communication to business. Another is an annual international invitational conference on technology and the management of policy. And a third is the public Leonardo Lecture. Our first lecturer was Jerry Sinclair a couple of years ago, entrepreneur extraordinaire, media mogul, and now the director of the Masters of Digital Media program at the Great Northern Way Campus Consortium. Our second last year was Richard Lipsey, author of General Purpose Technologies and Long-Term Economic Growth, Order of Canada, Fellow of the Royal Society, and the recipient of a gold medal for achievement in research from SSHRC, from SSHRC. But this Leonardo invitee seems to have created something of a special buzz. I don't know how you get to be named as the Canadian Fulbright Chair in Public Diplomacy at the USC Center on Public Diplomacy without a PhD. If I had known, I would have tried it myself. But as I said, Cory Doctorow really pushes the envelope. I'm hoping tonight he'll push yours. Without further ado, Cory Doctorow.
I actually don't have a BA either, so thank you, Brian, and thank you, Barry. Barry, you did such an amazing job wherever you are. You did such an amazing job putting together the publicity for this thing. It was just incredible. My phone was ringing off the hook with interview requests. I felt like some kind of rock star or something. So I'm a computer person. My father was a computer person before me. In 1977, we had a terminal in the house, and from the first time I put my hands on the keyboard, and the reason, if you've got your book signed, that you can't read what I wrote in there, is because I learned to type before I learned to write, is that I understood that computers were going to be a tool of liberation, that they were going to make us freer and better, that it was going to make the world a better place to live in. But it wasn't always thus, and I think that there's a widespread perception of that, but it wasn't always thus. It wasn't long ago that students on campus were taking those Polaroid cards, those punch cards that contain their ID, and writing, "I am a student, do not bend, spindle, fold, or mutilate me," on them, and tearing them up to protest the way that the machine was turning every one of them into a number, and impersonally processing them and surveying them, and so on. And so, for me, the big question is, how does a machine end up engendering two such different points of view about its functional characteristics, about its salient points, about the effect that it'll have on society? So I'd like can you guys hear this feedback? Am I hearing it? Yeah. Sound guy, should I just keep talking and you'll start tweaking, or do you want me to do anything about it? I can't even see. I'll just keep talking. Put the mic down lower. How's that? Maybe better. Great. So I like to start back looking at one of my literary heroes, a guy named Mark Twain, who had lots of strange ideas. One of the things that he had strange ideas about was the nature of causality in the universe. Mark Twain thought, as a good citizen of the early mechanical era, when machines were starting to repeat the labor of humans with a kind of exactitude and repetition that humans could never imagine, he thought that if you went back to the universe at the first moment of its creation, that you would find something like a green pool table with a base, felt layout, and in it a racked triangle of balls and a cue ball waiting to be broken, and that God was kind of the cue, and that when God struck that cue ball and shot it into the triangle and broke the balls across the table, that set the universe in motion. And if you knew how the cue ball hit the cue, or how the cue hit the cue ball rather, or how the cue ball hit the triangle, how the triangle was arrayed, that you could know everything that would unfold from there on. That with enough knowledge about the way that the universe worked, if you could only record what everything in the universe was doing at any given moment, where it was moving and how, that everything thenceforth would be controllable, tractable, that you could make sense of it, that you could, in fact, master the universe, the way that humanity had started to master the physical world by taking machines that could repeat and repeat and repeat with precision, with tirelessness, something that an artisan would have done individually, distinctively, and only in a limited way. So it's kind of a weird idea to our modern ears, but it has its roots in something that I think is really important. It has its roots in empiricism. It has its roots in the idea that if you write something down, you get to know more about it. And that if you write things down enough and you share what you've written down with other people, that eventually between the group of you, you can start to figure out how the whole universe works and start to untangle it. That is, of course, how we got the machines. That's how the Royal Astronomer figured out longitude or latitude and how the New World was opened. I mean, this is really important stuff. It's what makes the Enlightenment tick, is writing stuff down and sharing it with other people. Even before we understood how frail our imagination, our memories are, and this is, of course, something now that you have cognitive scientists having great fun with. Every now and again, someone will send you a little YouTube of the person talking to the reporter, and then that guy in the gorilla suit runs past in the background, and he's so focused on the reporter he doesn't even notice, or they switch the reporter with someone else, and the interviewee doesn't notice, because our perceptions are frail, and they're kind of rooted in this wet, imperfect thing that floats above our neck bone, and unless you write it down, it kind of didn't happen. We have a biological imperative to causality. We have somewhere in our ancestry, we have primates who figured out that they could catch more antelopes if they paid attention to what the antelopes did and used that to form theories about what the antelopes might do. That they could compare notes on antelopes and catch more antelopes. And those antelope catchers, those shrewd antelope catchers, they had more children, and they had more children, and so on. And so we've developed a certain kind of hardwired propensity to try to understand causality in the universe, even when it doesn't make any sense to do so. I mean, we have people who show up at casinos and go, well, the ball in the roulette thing has fallen 9 times on black. White surely is coming soon. I'm moving my bet there. I mean, we have all kinds of strange causality that we see in the universe. It's a kind of apophenia, right? Seeing patterns where they don't even exist. This hypertrophied part of our brain that seeks out pattern. And it's not just the Enlightenment that finds benefit out of empiricism, out of writing stuff down. I mean, this crops up again and again in our kind of self-improvement obsessed 21st century. If you go bankrupt, I'm not saying you should, but if you go bankrupt, the court will assign you a trustee, and almost certainly what that trustee will make you do is write down every penny you spend. Not because necessarily she wants you to build a spreadsheet and go, your chewing gum expenditures are too high this month, I think you need to reconsider them, but just because paying attention to what you're doing, right? Actually noting it as you go along starts to change how you behave. So being observed changes the observed thing. We know this from Heisenberg, but it works for human behavior too. It happens with weight loss. The thing that works about Weight Watchers isn't necessarily that you're eating meals of a certain size every day. It's that you're paying attention maybe for the first time to what you're eating. You're writing it down, and you're starting to know what's going on. It works for things like depression. Cognitive therapy revolves around just writing down what you're feeling and when, and what might else have sparked it, and what alternate hypotheses you can build from it. You treat your own emotional state like the physical universe and try to track it through observation, through empiricism. And it works, of course, in that foundational element of the modern division of labor, the time-motion study. And many of you have probably read or seen the film, not the Steve Martin one, about Cheaper by the Dozen, about Frank Gilbert, one of the fathers of this, he and Taylor, of time-motion study. And Gilbert was, this great, colorful character. He devoted himself to doing things like timing with a stopwatch, whether it was faster to do his shirt buttons up from the bottom up or the top down. And once he figured it out, he would do just that one, right? Just the fastest one, just the most efficient one. He invented, among other things, touch typing and surgical procedure and really the foundation of the assembly line. And that time-motion study, which gives us things like ergonomics and so on, is a kind of border case. It's the thing that sits between personal empiricism, where you try to understand the world, and a kind of out-of-person empiricism that is used to try to impose on you the same order that you might try to impose on the world by understanding it better. It's the moment at which people start to measure what you do to try to squeeze out of your personal behavior those grace notes that you might find personally satisfying, those moments of personal creativity that might cause phase changes or improvements in what you do. It's the moment at which your emotions become observed in the tiniest detail and taken apart, and not necessarily for your own benefit. So that's the rub. Does technology give us more control over the universe? Or does technology turn us into someone's universe to be controlled with more precision? So, enter the internet. The internet makes it possible for us to collaborate with each other and to express ourselves in ways that we never had dreamt possible. We start with things like internet news groups, Usenet news groups, where people can suddenly form discussion groups in ways that they never thought possible. You can suddenly find all the sports fans of the same team as yours, or people who are interested in the same breed of cat as you, without having to wait for that number to hit the critical mass where someone starts a specialty magazine that you somehow happen upon and subscribe to. And then something really important happens to the Usenet, which is the founding of something called the alt hierarchy. So prior to the founding of the alt hierarchy, if you wanted to start a new discussion group, Rets, Pets, Cats, Maine Coons, as opposed to the traditional Rep, Pets, Cats, you want to have a little schism to talk about Maine Coons. You needed to put it to a vote. You needed to make your case, and you needed to convince the grand old men of the Usenet administration pool that what you were doing was good. And most importantly, you needed to convince them that there wouldn't be any pornography there, because Usenet was mostly run on computers funded by the government, and no one wanted a senator or a member of parliament or a congressman standing up on the floor and saying, why are tax dollars going to fund this filth? So it was all very tightly controlled. And then a guy named John Gilmore, who I've been lucky enough to since make the personal acquaintance of and even become a friend of, founded one of the first dial-up internet service providers, one of the first internet service providers not run through a university or a company or a military contractor, government contractor. And through that, he decided to start his own Usenet news groups that anyone could start, the alt hierarchy. So instead of putting it to a vote, Rec Pets Cats Maine Coon, and should it be Rec Pets Cats Maine Coon, or should it be Rec Pets Cats Large Maine Coon, so you have a whole sub-hierarchy for it? You could start your large Maine Coon, and I'd start my Maine Coon large, and people could cross-post to both news groups if they wanted to, or neither, or start their own, and every conceivable news group that you can imagine was founded, including, of course, alt porn, but also things like alt.pave the earth, which was a serious technical discussion about the procedure by which you might pave the entire surface of the earth and race performance motorcycles on it, including what would happen to the weather, and you know, that maybe the Earth's mantle would change its characteristics, and we might have dramatic magnetic shifts that would disrupt the instruments on the performance motorcycles, and so on. The kind of thing that if it happens spontaneously, if it arises spontaneously, the amazing thing about it isn't that it arises spontaneously, because of course our brains are filled with a million strange ideas that come and go, but rather that you manage to find the 6 or 10 or 50 other people somewhere in the world who were as interested in you as you in this subject. And suddenly the cost of finding those people just fell through the floor. And every subject, no matter how weird, no matter how wrong-headed, no matter how right-headed, suddenly had a means to attract a critical mass around it and discuss it. Now, by today's standards, the cost of setting up a Usenet news group and attracting people to it is unbelievably high, because Usenet quickly transitioned to things like Flickr, which was started here in Vancouver by Stuart Butterfield and Katarina Fake and their company Ludicorp. And Flickr had this really cool thing that they, of course, stole from someone else, because innovation is all about who you make stuff from, called tags. And the way that tags worked is, instead of having the kind of top-down hierarchical ontology of photos, you know, remember when Yahoo started, they hired people whose job it was to categorize all human knowledge. And every time a web page came up, to decide which absolute categories through which all human knowledge could be divided, this particular web page belonged in, and to insert them carefully there, and to ensure that they were always in the right categories and never in the wrong categories, and to sort of tame the wild hairball that was the internet. As opposed to that, Flickr lets you set up your own tags, a little like the alt hierarchy. You can tag, you know, one of my favorite tags that I've been using lately, I've been living in California for about 10 months, is nice parking asshole. This is just me taking pictures of people in SUVs parked in 3 spots. But people can start any tag they want, and they don't have to agree on what the tag means. You can have an infinitude of collisions around a tag. You can have a tag called cat, and in cat you might find pictures of cats. You might find pictures of Caterpillar tractors. You might find a typeface called cat and instances of it in the real world, and anything in between. And there's no governing body that says, well, you need to fission off. Instead, this happens as kind of organic quality of it. And what's really interesting isn't the fissioning, but the merger. So someone, I don't know who, started a tag called decay, which is pictures of decaying things. Sometimes it's old barns. Sometimes it's people's lunches left in the back of their workplace refrigerator. Sometimes it's beautiful, macro focus photos of rust. Sometimes it's leaves crumbling. And you can subscribe to the decay tag. That is, you can get it in your newsreader, or you can look at it on the web. And you can contribute to the decay tag just by taking a picture and putting decay on it. Now, I take a lot of decay photos. I've never exchanged an email with anyone else who takes decay photos. They've never exchanged an email with me. As far as I know, no one has ever exchanged an email about decay. It's just this collaborative coffee table book that we've created without any of us ever communicating with each other, or planning, or getting to know each other, or even setting out an explicit goal. And you have things like Google, which make collaboration even cheaper than Flickr. So Google, the way that it makes sense of the internet is it makes a copy of the internet, and then it looks to see who links to whom. And it decides that pages that have lots of links coming to them are probably more authoritative than pages that have few links coming to them. And so when it ranks a search result, it takes those pages that have the most links coming to them and then the pages that have been linked to by pages that have lots of links coming to them, and so on. This kind of citation analysis, a kind of hypertrophy version of Erdos numbers from mathematics, where people's esteem rises and falls based on how many collaborators away they are from Paul Erdos, or a massive game of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Google does this to tease out the structure of the internet, the secret structure of the internet. And that means that every time you or me or anyone else who writes the web makes a link between two web pages, we collaborate in this great work of structuring the internet without knowing it, without communicating with each other, without having the explicit goal of doing so. In fact, unlike the decay tag, where you need to at least understand that you're adding a decay tag, even if you don't know other people are understanding the decay tag, Google's citation analysis works best when people don't know that Google is trying to make sense of what they're doing. In fact, you have this whole legion of blog spammers and search engine optimizers and link farmers who go to these great lengths to try to fake out Google, to try to make huge, massive fields of links between pages that are seemingly unrelated to one another, that all link to each other, that ultimately link to a Viagra ad or some other junk, a piece of malicious software that'll turn your computer into a zombie that's part of a denial of service network run by some Russian mafiosi. I mean, all of this stuff. And it's actually the people who explicitly set out to tell Google what the structure of the internet is that Google wants to ignore. Right? Google wants to take great lengths to avoid those pages. It actually spends more time, I think, trying to figure out who's trying to talk to Google so that they can shut their ears to them than it does listening to the people who aren't trying to talk to Google, from whom they derive their benefit. And Google, of course, drops the search cost for finding stuff through the floor. So if it was cheap before to find the news group that had web group, a discussion of things that you were interested in, it's now cheaper still. All it takes is the matter of a few seconds. Just type some stuff into Google and up it comes. And so this has opened the field for people who want to create and share with other people, for people who want to embark on collective endeavor in a way that they never could before. But it gets cheaper than that. You have things like YouTube and MySpace, where it's suddenly possible to collaborate using richer forms of media, where people will post some video and then someone else will take that video and cut it up and put it back up, and other people will cut that up and put it back up, and they'll cross-link to each other and really start to build audiences, things that creators rely on in order to turn a buck or to find the esteem that marks part of their artistic satisfaction, if such a thing is indeed possible. And then you have fields of endeavor like free and open source software. These are the open source or free tools like the Linux operating system or the Firefox browser that aren't made by just by corporations that sit down and hire a field of programmers and say, we've set out some requirements for a piece of software and we've broken it up among you, and now go to it and we'll coordinate our efforts with all this heavyweight technology and management meetings, and we'll keep it in sync with our marketing objectives and so on. But rather, these are like barn raisings where people have just gotten together for various reasons, ideological, political, social, and economic, to collaborate to build things that are previously only in the exclusive realm of huge corporations, like operating systems. The idea of an operating system built by volunteers who haven't met, who don't really communicate with one another, and who have just decided to do this more or less for a lark, is kind of like the idea of an office high-rise built by volunteers, or a nuclear power plant built by volunteers. And not just by volunteers, but by volunteers who show up on the building site because they saw flyers on telephone poles. The internet makes it possible to take control of your destiny in ways that we never thought of before. For example, I write columns for a magazine for IT professionals called Information Week. My editor there is a guy named Mitch Wagner. And Mitch edits his own blog for the magazine, and he writes about things that are of interest to chief information officers, like how to manage your firewall and how to roll out upgrades and should you get Vista. And one day he finds out that the message boards on one of his blog posts about should you upgrade to Vista have attracted two apparently young girls who are talking about whether or not their teacher is boring, and is Crystal a skank? Oh my God, did you see what she was wearing at recess? So he weighs in and he says, it's nice to find you here. What brings you to my chief information officer's blog, and they said, oh, but, you know, they blocked all the message boards and IM systems at school, so we just adopted yours. And this taking control of your destiny, you know, it's not just kids. Some of you probably remember the early days of the personal computer in the workplace. Before the personal computer infiltrated the workplace, workplaces that were computerized were governed by mainframes. And mainframes were governed by priesthoods of engineers who babysat them and met with management and decided a priori which screens you needed to look at. All the ways that you could represent data that were of interest to you. And all the ways that all the legitimate ways of parsing that data, and all the legitimate views into that data, and all the legitimate programs you might want to run, all the legitimate communication you might want to undertake. And they would decide this, and then they would program the mainframe, and you'd have this thing called a glass teletype on your screen, a little like, you know, a moving picture or any of those other oxymorons, a horseless carriage. Your glass teletype would sit on your desk, and you get to decide what you wanted to look at, or they would decide what you wanted to look at. And it turns out that this wasn't the best way to do your job. It turned out that groundbreaking programs like Lotus 123, which brought the spreadsheet to the workplace and to the home, were able to evince a new kind of efficiency from workers who, when authority devolved to them, could make way better decisions about how to look at data and what to do with it than their employers ever could. And these workers started to smuggle in Apple II Pluses to the workplace, which was sort of the standard for PCs in those days. They would smuggle them in and hide them under their desks on pain of getting fired, because you weren't supposed to look at data in ways that the priesthood hadn't approved. You weren't supposed to take data out of the company computers and make it all slithery and slippery and put it on floppy disks and then rearrange it and maybe take it home. This was a security breach, and people actually got fired for bringing computers into the workplace so they could rearrange the data that made up their jobs. And, you know, 20 years later, their spiritual descendants started to get fired for bringing new network technologies into their workplace. So as the internet started to creep into the workplace and make it possible for anyone anywhere to send files to anyone anywhere, to instant message with anyone anywhere, to use peer-to-peer software to exchange data and find new resources with anyone anywhere, to access any web page that anyone had put up and so on, the priesthood responded. They immediately clamped down on it. They started to restrict it. They hired companies like SmartFilter, who had found their fortune selling filtering technology to repressive regimes like those in Syria and China, and then found similarly repressive regimes at high schools, libraries, and corporations. They hired these people to restrict their network. They reprogrammed their firewalls to block these protocols. And of course, the workers of the 90s treated their IT department as damage and routed around them, just as the workers of the 80s had. And many of them risked getting fired. And in fact, you know, a company that got sold to Microsoft for $57 million, Reality's Groove, basically their whole business pitch is, we do all that stuff that Yahoo Messenger and Hotmail and everything else do, except you can manage it. That was their whole pitch. It's, your employees are running for the beach. Stop telling them that it hasn't been 30 minutes since they ate and they shouldn't go in swimming. Sell them towels. Right? That was their whole pitch. And now Ray Ozzie, who's head of the company, is the chief software architect of Microsoft. So the net informs this ideology that more control leads to less efficiency and less effectiveness. That it's just cheaper to add freedom than it is to control freedom to prevent the bad outcome from happening. It's cheaper to just babysit the bad outcome than it is to try and stop the bad outcome from happening. So one subject that has come up repeatedly recently about network freedom is network neutrality. It's actually something that the Canadian regulators just completely punted on and just said we're not even going to look at it, no matter how important it is to Canada's destiny. Network neutrality is the idea that when you request a web page, it gets sent to you, and your internet service provider doesn't decide whether or not you deserve to look at it. Network service providers would love to be able to differentially serve you web pages based on who's given them the biggest bribe this month. So you might request a page from Yahoo and it will come very speedily, but from Google it will come slowly. And they argue that they have the right to do this because Google is enjoying their infrastructure and getting a free ride on it. Of course, you pay for the infrastructure, and Google pays for the infrastructure. I think Google was amused to find out that they weren't paying all those millions of dollars for bandwidth that they were paying. But as far as the ISP is concerned, this just represents an opportunity to rent seek. And they make the argument that there are just some kinds of services that you couldn't deliver unless you could discriminate among providers on the internet. That the high quality stuff that we all want, like video, like this is the killer app, is video on demand. They've been predicting video phones since the 1939 World's Fair, and we still seems like no one really wants them. The killer app for video phones seems to be, again, delivering pornography. We won't ever get video because it's so sensitive to other kinds of network traffic. And of course, Senator Ted Stevens, the American senator who's in charge of network oversight of the committee that administers this for the United States government, who clearly has no idea how the internet works, and is furthermore clearly entirely in the pocket of the network operators who pay his salary, or rather pay his campaign contributions. Famously said, the internet is not a truck, it's a series of tubes. And these tubes get blocked. My staffer sent me an internet on Friday, and it didn't arrive until Monday because of all these commercial videos flying around on it. But at those same hearings, we heard from another person. We heard from the public relations officer, the person who's in charge of dealing with normal people for the Internet 2 Consortium. The Internet 2 Consortium is a group of people from the future. They operate on this very, very high-tech university academic network that joins up various academic institutions around the world with connections that are so fast that they make what we have in our homes and workplaces look like tin cans and string. And moreover, Internet 2 runs on a next generation internet protocol called IPv6 that actually makes it very easy to discriminate against different kinds of traffic. You can give video priority over whatever. So he went to these hearings and he said, when we first began to deploy this network, our engineers started with the assumption that we should find technical ways of prioritizing certain kinds of bits, such as streaming video or video conferencing, in order to assure that they arrive without delay. For a number of years, we seriously explored various quality of service schemes, including having our engineers convene a quality of service working group. Anything that starts with convening a working group never ends well. As it developed, though, all our research and our practical experience supported the conclusion that it was far more cost-effective to simply provide more bandwidth. With enough bandwidth in the network, there is no congestion, and video bits don't need preferential treatment. All of the bits arrive fast enough, even if they're intermingled. So here we have this amazing revelation that it's actually cheaper to add more internet than it is to try and lock down the internet so that we can manage the scarcity. And it's cheaper to just throw more capacity at the problem than figure out how to manage the fact that we don't have enough capacity. It's amazing. And he's not the only person who discovered this. This lesson starts with people like Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web and made it free and open for anyone to add web pages to. And before the web, we had these advanced approaches to solving the problem of information and what's good information and what's bad information. We had services like AOL, or many of you might remember Alex. Do you remember Alex, Bell Canada's efforts? They borrowed the French Minitel, and it was like a dumb terminal that you could bring home, and every time you typed a command on your keyboard, it added like 1 cent to your phone bill. But the only people that you could access were people who were paying for the right to be there, and the theory was that they're paying for the right to be there, they must be good. AOL had the same deal, right? You could only set up an AOL destination if you worked with them and their quality assurance guidelines, and you adhere to all their visual guidelines, and you hired a whole programming team to develop your AOL application for you. And their committee would meet, the Politburo would decide whose AOL could exist and whose AOL couldn't exist. And they were all completely outcompeted by the web, because it turned out that rather than have just one person show you the one true truth, you could just have millions of truths and layer search tools on top of them and enable people to choose among those truths and triangulate on their own personal socially constructed truth by looking what everyone else was saying, and if they disagreed strongly enough, to make their own, right? And here we have further expressions of this idea in things like Wikipedia. Wikipedia, there are lots of people who are Wikipedia detractors, and I always get the feeling that they're looking at a different Wikipedia from me. Because, I look at Wikipedia, and every now and again I see something a little dodgy, and I think maybe it's a media literacy thing, because looking at Wikipedia pages is like reading a mailing list by just looking at the headers. All the interesting stuff in Wikipedia is in those discussions that hang off of every page, where you can watch people go back and forth, hammer and tongs, socially constructing the truth, right? You can actually see where the bodies are buried. You know, it's not like there aren't bodies buried in the Britannica, you just don't get a shovel. Wikipedia has a pretty advanced suite of shovel tools that you can deploy at your leisure to understand how the truth is constructed. And boy, I find it infinitely useful. And again, you have this great example where you can build a Britannica, and you can hire some experts and vet all their contributions, and you'll still make mistakes, and you'll still have people who fake their credentials. I mean, people fake their credentials all over the place. The guy who runs the World Intellectual Property Organization, the UN agency that has the same relationship to dumb copyright law that Mordor has to evil in Middle-earth, he was just outed for having lied about his age for 24 years in office, having faked his age as 12 years older than it was when he signed up. Like he said he was like 36 and 20 instead of 24, so that he could get his job as head of WIPO. So it's like that scene in The Breakfast Club where the nerd has the fake ID in which he makes himself 36, and they say, "What do you have this for?" And he says, "Well, so I can check out more books from the library." Right? Like, who fakes their age to chair WIPO? But people fake credentials all over the place. And you know, the amazing thing about Wikipedia is that it fails incredibly well, right? Succeeding is easy, right? Succeeding, if you don't care about how you fail, is easy. We can make cars that go 400 miles an hour, but if they don't have brakes, they're deeply problematic. It doesn't really matter how fast they go. Whereas Wikipedia fails brilliantly, right? Someone is outed as being a cheat, you can instantaneously find every word, every punctuation mark they inserted into Wikipedia and reevaluate everything that they've got there. Try and do that with the Britannica. My guess is their content management system won't let you. So all of these things represent kind of one internet ideology. The ideology that the internet makes us freer, that it makes control obsolete, that it makes control needless, that all the things that we introduce control for are more cheaply done with freedom as soon as we add this tool to it. And isn't that a fantastic thing? But it informs this other ideology, this idea that controltopia is just around the corner. So Admiral John Poindexter's total information awareness was kind of the first salvo in the most recent skirmish over this. The idea that if we just, after September 11th, where the American government discovered that it wasn't capable of parsing through all the facts that it had gathered to discover that something bad was about to happen, the response that he came up with was, well, maybe we just weren't gathering enough facts, right? Maybe we just the haystack was too small. So if we make the haystack bigger, maybe the needles will pop out. And this was pretty ineffective, to say the least. But it seems like you're almost there. It's like one of those 2 a.m. problems where you're trying to assemble that thing that your kid got under the Christmas tree, and you're almost there. And every minute it seems like you're almost there, and maybe you just need to do one more thing. Maybe you need to just try one more tactic, and you can get it. Or maybe you'll solve that video game and level up if you just do one more thing. Right? It seems like we're always one more form of control away from having a system that will read the actions of terrorists from the guts of the sacrificial lamb and make them and allow us to preemptively stop terrorist attacks. We're just one inkling away. So we keep adding new kinds of control, like the U.S. visit program. Canadians don't really experience this much unless we have visas, but most people who go to America these days get fingerprinted, and they have photos taken of them. And those photos and fingerprints go into a giant database that are supposed to find people who are plotting, attacks against America. And so far, they spent $15 billion on this system, and they caught 1,000 bad guys. Now, those bad guys weren't terrorists. They were people who'd overstayed their visas, and people who filled out their paperwork wrong, or people who lied about their credentials, like the head of WIPO, but not actual terrorists. So, at the cost of $15 million each, they caught 1,000 welfare cheats. Right? One can only wonder how many police officers they could have hired at the cost of $15 million each to find bad people, and how many more bad people they would have stopped. We create these funny web blacklists. I alluded to them before. These lists of web pages that you're not supposed to look at. The idea is that you can fill a boiler room with enough semi-employed, semi-skilled individuals to look at every web page on the internet and determine empirically whether or not it's a good page or a bad page, build a huge bucket of bad pages and then block them all. We've got an even weirder version of that coming here in Canada. This is Clean Feeds. These are the people who are going to find all the child pornography on the internet and stop you from seeing it. And but they're not going to tell you what's on the list, because then you'd be able to find the child pornography, because the filter doesn't actually work. If you're trying to find child pornography, it only works if you're not trying to find child pornography. The idea is that it'll stop you from accidentally finding child pornography. As someone who surfs about 6 sigmas away from normal, I can tell you, you just don't run into child pornography by accident on the internet. You kind of have to be looking at it, at least not on the web. Probably in email with spam, but not on the web. And that, you know, in order to make this control a little better, to backstop the problems with the original control, we're not going to publish the list. But what we will, and we're not going to tell you when you've gone to a web page that's blocked on the list. You'll just get this silent error of 404, you know, like maybe the server was down. But what we will do is, if you figure out that a web page is on the list somehow, you can appeal it. Of course, if your appeal is denied, then you're a child pornographer. And that somehow, this will actually stop child porn from being seen in this country. Now, don't get me wrong, child porn is bad. It goes without saying, child porn is bad. But we have a way of stopping child porn from coming into this country. We do it in the real world. We do that with printed material. So, for example, there was a recent groundbreaking award-winning comic book by Alan Moore with The Watchmen and V for Vendetta called Lost Girls. It's a kind of strange pornographic retelling of Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and The Wizard of Oz. And it's won all kinds of awards, and it's very interesting, but it also features fairly graphic depictions of pre-adolescent sexual experiences. It's kind of, you know, a Nabokov meets Spider-Man. And initially that book was blocked from coming into the country. Someone tried to import it, Canada Customs said no, and they published the fact that this had been denied entry into the country. So because it was published, people were able to petition to have it re-examined. And it was re-examined by the customs people, and they looked into it more deeply, and they said, well, there's graphic material here that's certainly disturbing. There's also clear artistic merit, and this is an obscene material, and we're going to let it into the country. That's how the system is supposed to work, right? Secret lists have never produced good outcomes. You know, secrecy is the opposite of building great, rich data sets. So to come back to empiricism, for 500 years, what passed for science was alchemy. Alchemy is a lot like science, except you don't tell anyone else what you've learned. So for 500 years, every alchemist discovered for himself that drinking mercury was a bad idea. And as a result, and we call that period the Dark Ages, right? And as a result, science didn't go very far. Right? And then alchemists started to publish their outcomes. And suddenly we had science, right? We were able to build one another on each other's work. And as a result, we had what we call the Enlightenment. And the idea that we can build these block lists that are effective only if they're secret flies in the face of everything we've learned since the Enlightenment. Everything we've learned from the Enlightenment suggests that big data sets are only tractable with lots of eyes. You know, in the open source free software world, we say with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, all bugs are tractable. But with a few eyeballs, it's nearly impossible. We have things like data retention rules, which are now coming into effect potentially in the US and which just came into effect in Europe when I was living in there, where suddenly we're being forced to retain enormous amounts of information. Every click you make, every web page you look at, every email you send, every IM you send, all of this being stored at the ISP level. When I was in Britain, we were working on this with the Open Rights Group and with the No2ID group. We did a little back-of-the-envelope calculation about how many linear meters of CD-ROMs this would generate per second in Britain alone as they tried to make sense of all this information. And there's not many people who think that this information will be useful, that you'll be able to put it all in one big computer and tease out something interesting from it. Rather, it seems like this is going to be used after the fact. Like countries around the world are now repealing habeas corpus in the face of the war on abstract nouns. And they're saying there are people out there who are so dangerous that we need to arrest them, but not so dangerous that we actually can charge them with anything. And so the idea is that when you figure out the person you need to arrest, you can subsequently go back through all their web traffic, forensically and see what it is they've done that can give you excuse to hold them. It's like a modern day version of Cardinal Richelieu's maxim, give me 6 lines in any man's hand and I'll find you a reason to hang him. It leads into things like no-fly lists, where we have 4-year-olds and senators who are so dangerous that they can't be allowed to fly, but not so dangerous that we have enough grounds to arrest them. And the reason that no-fly lists don't work, and the reason that all of this stuff doesn't work, can be understood if we just understand statistics. But statistics are hard to understand. It's not in our nature to understand statistics. We are counterintuitive in respect to statistics. Otherwise, the lottery wouldn't work. Right? So in statistics, there's this idea of something called the paradox of the false positive. So say you have a disease that occurs 1 in a million times, and you have a test for the disease that's 99% accurate, and you test 1 million people. Well, statistically, 1 of those people will have the disease, but statistically, 10,000 of those people will be identified as having the disease. Well, that's bad news if you're hoping to catch the disease. Now, try it with no-fly lists. In fact, let's take the no-fly list one further. A little Gedanken experiment my friend Bruce Schneider, as a security expert, cooked up. Say we have this a machine that can predict terrorists 99% of the time. And we take that machine and we hook it up to a rifle over the magnetometer. And as you approach the magnetometer, if you're a terrorist, it shoots you in the head. For every terrorist we shoot in the head, we shoot 9,999 non-terrorists in the head. But of course, terrorism occurs a lot less than 1 in a million. And any automated test we have for terrorists is going to be a lot less accurate than 99%. And that's why this stuff never works. But we keep adding more tests, as though if only we make the mountain bigger, if only we make the haystack bigger, it'll eventually work. We have other efforts to add control to the internet, efforts that arise from copyright that are being applied all over the board. These efforts are sometimes flying under the banner of digital rights management, or DRM. And this is the idea that you can engineer systems that allow you to control the user's computer while she is watching a piece of media or listening to a piece of music, and that her computer, while she's listening to this piece of music, won't obey her orders. So if she says to the computer, save the music, it'll say no. If she says to the computer, make a copy of the music, it'll say no. If she says to the computer, send the music to somewhere else, it'll say no. Or output it to this device, it'll say no. I'm a science fiction writer, right? That's what I mostly do. And in the science fiction films, there's an unfortunate recurring theme, which is the self-destruct button on a rocket ship. This inevitably happens to build tension in the third act of the film. Someone accidentally hits the self-destruct button, and a calm British woman's voice starts counting down and says, self-destruction initiated. Self-destruction in 10, 9, 8. And I always think, who's the idiot engineer who designed a rocket ship with a self-destruct button? I mean, wouldn't rocket ships be better if they didn't have a normal operational mode in which they exploded? So we're confronted today by computers that we try desperately to control and understand. Computers that we do everything in our power to keep from hemorrhaging our personal data in a kind of data Valdez. Right? That we try to keep from being enlisted into denial of service networks by the mafia. And yet, we are actually designing computers from the ground up, as with the new computers that are Vista ready, to take orders from other people. Right? To be remote controlled by other people without the consent, knowledge, or capability for overriding of the owner of the computer who is seated at the console. So, This is this mentality that the internet will make it easier for us to control people, that finally we can replace the imperfect policeman with the fetishistically perfect computer that will never stop watching, that will never stop aggregating data about you, and that eventually will know everything about you and will be able to predict all the bad people. But when you watch everyone, you watch no one. I met my girlfriend some years ago at a think tank Nokia was throwing in Helsinki. They put us up in this great hotel in the middle of Nokia. It's the tallest, middle of Helsinki. It's the tallest building in central Helsinki. It's the Hotel Victoria. It's 12 stories tall. Helsinki's not a very built-up town. And there's a little plaque by the front door that says, during the Soviet occupation, this hotel was used by the KGB as its headquarters. When they left, we pulled 40 kilometers of wiretapping wire out of our 12-story building. Because the central job of every KGB apparat was to wiretap
every other KGB apparat. Every time you added a new KGB apparat to a new office in a kind of twisted version of Metcalfe's law, everyone needed to pull a wire down there so they could make sure that he wasn't doing anything that was going to hurt them. When you're watching everyone, you're watching no one. The Stasi, the East German secret police, had a file on everyone living in East Berlin. They knew who was telling subversive jokes. They knew who was sleeping with whom. They totally missed the fact that the wall was about to come down. Because when you're watching everyone, you're watching no one. And the danger isn't that you're going to be caught for some minor infraction. The danger isn't that you're going to be ticketed for speeding, although that's a problem. You know, in London they've just added traffic cameras all through the center of town, and not just not nominally to catch speeders, but because they've got this congestion charge thing. If you drive in the center of London, you have to pay £10 a day, and you know, there's a regressive tax for you. And in order to enforce it, they take a picture of every license plate at every intersection all through central London, and they compare them to a database of who's license paid. And if you haven't been license paid, you get a ticket for £100. But of course, this can also be used as speed cameras, and they do. So if you get in a car and you put your foot a little too heavily on the gas and you just exceed the speed limit by a couple kilometers an hour, a few weeks later in your mailbox is a ticket for £100. Right? So that kind of robotic enforcement is a bit of a bummer, because normally we don't think of laws as being absolute. Laws are a function of what they say and how hard they are to enforce. But it gets a lot worse than that. It's not that you're going to be punished for some minor infraction. It's that you're going to be selectively enforced against. That, like in the former Soviet Union, where there weren't really laws per se against speaking out against the government, there were laws against black marketeering, and everyone had to black marketeer, because there's this great book called Homemade Soviet Inventions that reflects this kind of the Soviet marketplace such as it was. And there are things like the inventions that we made for the month when all the stores had were forks. Right? So everything we made was made out of forks, right? So of course everyone's black marketeer. And if someone told an impolitic joke, or was sleeping with the wrong person, or you know, pissed off the wrong person, you could go over to their house and you could find evidence they're black marketeering and send them to the Gulag. The Gulags are full of black marketeers, not dissidents, right? So we already have this today. Everyone file shares. Everyone under a certain age file shares. It's like 99% penetration, the fastest adopted technology in the history of the world. And of course it is, right? So copyright is always at a step with technology. You can't write a copyright law that can imagine all the things people might do with technology. Copyright's a technology regulation. It governs what you can do with copying machines like computers. When we write a copyright law, we don't know what people might do 20 years in the future. Like all good programmers, eventually members of parliament have to ship code. They have to write the law and ship it out there, and then they do a 1.1 release later on when the technological reality changes. So of course everyone's breaking the law with copyright, because the copyright hasn't been rewritten since we got peer-to-peer. You know, of course it doesn't reflect peer-to-peer. So the thing is that because everyone is a peer-to-peer crook, you don't have to bust people for what they're doing. You can bust them for peer-to-peer. And there's a kid who wrote a search engine at an American university called Flatland. He maintains this search engine, and all it did was scour the campus network for open file share points on the campus network, Windows sharing points, where people might have PowerPoints of their lectures, or audio of their lectures, or term papers, or music, or video, or any other thing that can be represented as a series of zeros and ones. And he would index them all and make them available to you, just like Google indexes all the publicly available web shares and puts them in a big index and lets you search them and find what you want. So when the Recording Industry Association found out what he was doing, they came after him, not because he wrote a search engine, not nominally, but because he was a file sharer, because of course he was a file sharer. And they busted him. And as a condition of his settlement, they asked at first, although we managed to make such a stink about it that they rescinded it, they asked at first that he change his major and swear never to write code again. So that's the danger of universal surveillance. It's that if you look at someone hard enough, you can always find a reason to wrongfoot them. And when there's always a reason to wrongfoot you, then they don't have to come after you for the politically unpopular thing you're doing. They can come after you for the nominally illegal thing that you're doing. So we need to distinguish sharply and cleanly between two different kinds of surveillance. The surveillance you do of yourself, like, you know, I love the fact that my browser remembers the web pages I've been to recently and auto-completes the URLs, or that I can go back through my old emails, that I can wear a pedometer and know how far I've walked, or that I can use a GPS and find that place I went to last week. I mean, I have no sense of direction. I get lost playing Quake. So GPS is a godsend for me. and the kind of surveillance that other people impose on you, the surveillance that's used to keep track of you. And as we start to build applications that try to hook us up with other people and help us build these collaborative networks, these low-cost collaborative networks, we need to start revisiting the questions of network architecture and start asking ourselves how much of that matching with other people can be done here locally on our own computer, and just send, and we can send little bits of anonymized data to a server for the dating service. Instead of having it all live on a server somewhere, instead of having all your email, all your IMs, every record of everything you've done sat there on some server somewhere. The ability of machines to add us up is greater than it's ever been. We are suddenly surrounded by things like RFID tags, radio frequency ID tags. These are tiny little tags that are used to keep track of objects as they move through time and space. So for example, you find these in objects going through the supply chain. So to figure out what's in this container without opening it up, or what's on this pallet without opening it up, or what's on this shelf, and that stuff's all great. But the problem is that they're subject to post facto revelation. So you might have a radio frequency ID tag for your transit pass, as I did when I lived in London. And those radio frequency ID tags, nominally they can only be read from a few centimeters away. But as a practical matter, they can be read from several meters away. And people say, well, that's no big deal, because just knowing that my radio frequency ID is this very long number doesn't tell you anything useful about me. But the problem is that if you subsequently get arrested or detained, your radio frequency ID tag can be read, and then that can be compared to all the radio frequency ID tags read all around the city to figure out where you've been, who you were near, and so on. In fact, I was recently at a Computers, Freedom, and Privacy conference where some hackers from the Shmoo Group, who are up here in Vancouver and in Seattle, put together a Bluetooth sniffer that sniffed the Bluetooth on people's phones. And at the end of the conference, they did this little presentation. They said, these people know each other. These people go out for cigarettes. These people left sessions early, right? They knew all of that stuff just by watching where the radio frequency ID tags were. And they may not know exactly who you were, but if subsequently they can isolate you and read your tag, they can then connect it up with this whole data set. We are now entering an era of continuous, non-stop personal identification. We are always being identified as we move through time and space. And it starts back with something relatively innocent. We think of the automobile age as being a great liberator of youth, right? The sexual revolution, the drive-in movie theater, and so on. But it's also the first moment in our history in which teenagers start to routinely carry identity papers. And from there on, the identity papers have become more necessary to conduct more business as you move through time and space. The number of contexts in which you're asked for your ID now has exceeded the number of contexts in which you aren't. And sometimes you don't even have to be asked for your ID. Your person can be interrogated for identifying information. So the RFID risk arises because RFIDs themselves contain globally unique identifiers. These are numbers that are believed to be contained only once, or to have only one instance of them. So this RFID serial number appears in no other RFID, and that RFID serial number appears in no other ID, and so on. So our first experience with GUIDs was with social insurance numbers. And again, you can see massive mission creep, where as soon as you give someone a GUID, it starts to be applied in lots of ways. And the downside for us as defenders of our privacy is that as soon as you're keyed to a GUID in multiple contexts, it becomes easy to merge that record. It becomes easy to say that the Cory Doctorow with this library card is also the Cory Doctorow with this bus pass, is also the Cory Doctorow with this tax return, is also the Cory Doctorow who bought these movies, is also the Cory Doctorow who looked at these websites. And suddenly all of these data sets can be merged into one single unitary data set, and we come back to Richelieu. 6 lines in any man's hand will find you a reason to hang him. And the worst of the GUIDs is the biometric GUID, which is now finding its way into, again, every form of identification. These are things like retinal scans, fingerprint scans, gait analysis, face recognition, hand geometry recognition, fingertip geometry recognition. These have all of the dangers of a GUID, and they have, in addition, the subsequent danger of not being revocable. So we've had people clone fingerprints, for example, using gummy bears. Right? You can clone a fingerprint using a gummy bear and use that to gain access to buildings that use fingerprint protection to restrict access. So once your fingerprint has been cloned by the gummy bear wielding mafia, how do you stop using your fingerprint? right? How do you change fingerprints so that we can distinguish between the bad fingerprint you and the good fingerprint you? Most of all, though, all of this continuous identification conditions us to live in a surveillance state. So I went to Walt Disney World for Christmas. I have a kind of love-hate relationship with Disney. Those of you who've read my first novel, Down Down the Magic Kingdom, know that I have this love-hate relationship with Disney. And those of you who haven't, it's a free download. And at Disney World this year, they started fingerprinting people as they go through the turnstiles. Not just fingerprinting them, but searching their bags. And they say, oh, we're not fingerprinting you, we're measuring the unique characteristics of your fingertip. And, you know, there's like, they really are. They're measuring the shape of your fingertip, not the whorls of your fingerprint. But still, right, everyone who goes in is getting fingerprinted. Now, you don't have to be fingerprinted. If you want, you can choose to subject yourself to additional scrutiny, right? You can, it's like at the airport, you don't take your shoes off, you can subject yourself to a full hand search. In this case, you can show photo ID, and they'll let you in. I've been meaning now to print up a thing that says fake ID, and using that as my photo ID, because it doesn't say what kind of photo ID you have to show. And you can show photo ID, but of course, no one working at the turnstiles knows this. And this is an important piece of any kind of identity arrangements, that there's always some kind of fallback for identity arrangements, but they don't always work. So for example, for any biometric you name, pretty much 1 in 20 people, 5% of the population, can't use it. So they're fingers up and scarred because they were bricklayers, or because they got into a fight, or they're missing a fingertip, or their retinas are scarred, or they wear contacts, or you just can't get a read. I mean, software is not making a perfect record of it, and it makes some assumptions about what your fingertip looks like, what your hand geometry is, how your retina works, and some software just can't read some people. And we say, oh, we'll have a fallback for those people. Those people who've done nothing wrong can go and join the line of people who need to be subject to secondary scrutiny because their retinas can't be read. So we get to the turnstiles every time, and we say we prefer to show ID, and every time the person sitting behind the turnstile says, you can't do that, you have to be fingerprinted. And then they say, but it's not fingerprinting, we're just measuring the unique characteristics of your fingertip. And we say, no, you don't. And they say, yes, they do. No, you don't. Yes, they do. And these arguments go on and on and on. And then one day we're actually doing this at Epcot Center, and a 10-year-old kid behind us says, no, you have to be fingerprinted. Everyone has to be fingerprinted. And that's when it got to me. We used to worry that Disney was conditioning our little children to want to grow up to be princesses. Now I worry that they're growing them up to want to live in Gulag Canada, Gulag America, right? To be citizens of a surveillance state, to be routinely subject to search and surveillance and identification without particularized suspicion. So post-facto correlation is an important characteristic of being continuously surveilled, right? We worry about being identified in the first place, but we need to worry more about being identified later. So I talked at the start of this talk about Usenet, that old, venerable internet message board system. That's where all the people who were early net heads hung out and chatted with each other and flirted and talked about their drug experiences and all that other stuff. And so back in the old days, you had undergrads who were like, whoa, I can't believe how deep I got into the K-hole last weekend at Woodstock 99, right? None of them dreamt that Usenet was being archived and that someday Usenet would be searchable. And just a few years later, some of these people were having IPOs. And on the cover of Red Herring, you know, meet the K-hole CEO. And it's coming again. We now routinely have photos of ourselves taken and put up on the internet. And so long as our names are associated with those photos, we feel pretty good about not being identified. But a lot of factors are combining to want to identify photos, to want to identify faces. You have the war on abstract nouns. You have casinos wanting to catch cheaters. You have lots and lots of people who are trying to recognize faces with software. And the better that facial recognition software gets, the faster this huge post-facto privacy hemorrhage becomes. So today, we can search the entire internet and find all the photos. Tomorrow, we'll be able to search the entire internet and cluster those photos into which ones are photos of which person. So we have this unique unnamed person, and here are all the photos of that person. Here's that person at their graduation, here's that person at their wedding, here's that person horsing around on holiday, and here's that person at that anonymous diaper fetishist party. And then we'll be able to find the ones that have names associated with them, and we'll be able to apply those names to all the other photos. And then every stupid thing that you were ever photographed doing will be interrogatable via the internet by entering your name into it. One answer to this is to apply this digital rights management stuff that takes control of your computer to your personal identifying information. The reasoning goes that it doesn't have to just be used by large entertainment companies to try and restrict copying, although you can see how well that's working. You could also say, give Revenue Canada your tax records and an information rights management wrapper that would restrict them from reading your tax data after without your permission. They'd have to come back to your license server every time they wanted to read it. When the data retention period ended, you just turn off the license server and it would disappear. But this ignores a really important fact about privacy, that privacy is social. Right? The reason that we need to be private from Revenue Canada or our doctor or our hospital is because we don't have the authority to control how they use our documents. So in other words, the argument starts with, well, if we could only gain authority over the people we don't have authority over, we could stop them from leaking our data. But of course, if we could only gain authority over the people we don't have authority over, we could in fact stop them from leaking our data. That's the problem, we don't have authority over them. The example Bill Gates likes to throw out is, imagine the hospital that leaks the fact that you have HIV. Well, if your hospital has someone working at it who's so unethical that they'll disclose the fact that you have HIV, but so dumb that they can't remember one bit of information, this person has HIV, then your problem isn't an information technology problem, it's a human resources problem. So now we're seeing this stuff creeping into every PC, starting with Vista, the new Microsoft operating system, which has been built from the ground up to support this, been built from the ground up to allow anyone to take control over your computer while you're looking at their data, and to stop you from controlling your computer while that's going on. And we can only imagine what the consequences will be. Instead of ushering in one of these eras of transparent utopia, where anyone can turn the tools of surveillance on the people in power and expose them for the frauds that they are, we're now entering an era in which the people who are in power can wrap the memos that whistleblowers might want to leak in information rights management that will keep you from sending it to the newspaper. We tend to think that large surveillance is just small surveillance writ large. That a network sniffer that records everything that you do on the network over the public internet is nothing more than a kind of hypertrophied version of the curtain-twitching peck sniff who sits at the window and watches you as you go in and out of your house. But there's a huge difference when you get into that difference of scale. There's a huge difference in kind that's evinced by it. NSA surveillance of every single internet user in America, and probably in the world, because you think about how much traffic goes into American servers, is not the same as one dirty cop who looks up your driver's license in a database and sells the information to a journalist. And the organization I used to work for, that I'm still a fellow of, Electronic Frontier Foundation, which has got a Canadian chapter here that I urge you to get involved with. The Canadian organization is called ORC, Online Rights Canada, which is the best acronym ever. They're presently suing AT&T, the American telecoms giant, for their participation in this wiretapping effort, whereby every single network connection in America was being wiretapped, and that the statutory damages are $150 per customer per day. So they're looking to exceed the total net worth of AT&T, and also, and not incidentally, to drag through the discovery process all kinds of information that has been otherwise suppressed and couldn't be retrieved through Freedom of Information Act requests into the public eye so that we can know more about what they're doing. We are sleepwalking into a surveillance society, and kids are at the forefront. They're on the battle lines. There are CCTV cameras everywhere, in schools, in workplaces, on public transit, everywhere. And we say that they make us safer, but historically, all CCTVs do is move the crime around. I have a friend who was murdered in London on his doorstep as he was leaving, just after leaving the tube, by 3 people who were caught on the CCTV leaving the tube. And they were eventually arrested for using his mobile phone. That's how they eventually caught them. And he's still dead, even though they arrested him. The reason that they ignored the CCTV that they knew was there is they were the kind of people who were making the kind of bad judgments that lead people to stab other people to death for their mobile phones. Right? Those people aren't making good decisions about their future to begin with, and CCTVs don't deter them. At best, they sometimes move them around. But in the name of catching those people, we're passing rules in the UK now, like kids aren't allowed to wear hoods indoors because it stops us from taking pictures of their faces as they move through time and space. We've got metal detectors in schools and at nightclubs. MySpace has just launched a tool to help parents spy on their kids. Disney has a phone that helps parents spy on their kids and watch where they go and who they call and so on. All of this in the name of stopping predators. But when you look at the actual research on this, and Dana Boyd, who's a great social networking researcher, has published some good stuff on this. When you look at the actual numbers on predation of children, what you find is if you draw a pie chart, you get this kind of Pac-Man shape. And the big yellow bit is parents, right? And then the little one is everyone else. And you pull that out and you expand it. So you exclude parents, you get another Pac-Man. And that big yellow bit is friends of parents. And then the rest is everyone else. And you pull that out, and then you do it again. And the big yellow bit is adults the child knows, and then everyone else. And then eventually you get down to this tiny infinitesimal sliver, which is, the kind of horror show Silence of the Lambs predators, who of course are as terrible as we can imagine and loom large in our imagination because we fear the unknown disproportionately. This is why we spend so much time obsessing about, for example, getting mugged, but not much time worrying about wearing our seatbelts or quitting smoking. We don't worry about the unknown. But we're not made safer by chasing threats that are infinitesimal at the expense of threats that are right here. Spending $15 billion to catch 1,000 immigration cheats doesn't make Americans safer, especially when you consider that that's $15 billion that was diverted from social programs and policing. The right to be secure and private isn't abrogated by technology. Our technology can serve us or enslave us. Ultimately, it's our own choice. You can be a Luddite. You can be a saboteur. And I don't use those in a pejorative sense. The Luddites were people who went on strike to get a fair deal when the loom came along. The saboteurs were people who thought that the machines were taking away their jobs and threw their sabots, their wooden clogs, into the machines to stop them from working as a labor action. So one thing that you can do is you can run a Tor node. Tor is this thing called the Onion Router. And it's a tool for anonymizing internet traffic. It was invented by the Office of Naval Intelligence as a piece of free and open software that now lots of people work on, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And it was designed for people in repressive regimes like Syria and China, and it's used now in high schools and corporations around the developed world as well. It's a way that you can anonymize your internet traffic and that you can help other people anonymize their internet traffic. And I'm proud to say the server that runs Boing Boing, which is in Toronto at 151 Front Street, and the big Torx, the big Canadian interchange, is a Tor exit node and handles a lot of Tor traffic to help people be anonymous on the internet. You can use cryptography, strong cryptography that can keep your messages secret. It's easy to say that one guy who's using the envelope instead of using postcards is probably up to something dodgy. But as soon as we all start putting our letters in envelopes, it's hard for people to pick out who the bad guys are. There's this big problem with providing encrypted data tools to people who live in China, for example, which is that the Great Firewall of China can be used to figure out who has too much encrypted traffic. And then you don't need to find out what's in the encrypted pipe. You can just arrest those people for being smartasses. Right? You don't have to know what they're doing. It's enough to know that they're doing something they don't want you to know about. You can join organizations like ORC, Free Culture, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You can support Canadian organizations like CIPIC. And you can refuse to sign on to those end-user license agreements that are all over the world, in which as we get on the bus or take our dry cleaning in or look at a web page or use a search engine or buy a record, we find ourselves clicking through all these agreements, these nonsensical agreements that challenge the very idea that we can have an agreement, that we can have a social contract by standing there, shaking your head and shouting, no, you've agreed to say yes to me coming over to your house and wearing your underwear and making some long-distance phone calls and so on. These agreements through which you waive your privacy rights, these agreements through which you waive every statutory right you have. I actually came up with this thing called the Reasonable Agreement that says, by reading this, you agree to release me from all the agreements that I've entered into with your employer, and you further warrant that you have the authority to do so. Right? And if you go to reasonableagreement.org, you can find one, you can paste them at the bottom of your email, and stickers and t-shirts. You can make your own stickers and t-shirts. I put them on all my warranty cards. So when I send in a warranty card for a product, the person who receives it releases me from the agreement that came with the product. Let's start highlighting the absurdity of this stuff, because it starts with the last recourse of all of these people who take away our privacy is, well, you agreed to let us do it, so let's stop agreeing. Thank you. Yeah.
Today, I found your talk excellent and so ironic in some ways, in many ways. I'm a TA here at SFU, and we had our class as a second year course, Introduction to Information Technology. And today is week 9, and we talk about democracy and technology. And so in tutorial today, the question was, how do you think about technology and democracy? It's sort of a vague question. I mean, how can we use technology to enhance democracy? And one student was trying so hard they can't come up with almost nothing. One student ventures and she says, well, the cops have this thing now where you can use your cell phone to take pictures of crimes, and this will really increase our democracy by making us more secure. And I cringed and I thought, so some guys had too much drink at a bar and he goes and pees against a corner and somebody takes a picture and this is now a crime. I mean, it technically is against the law, but it's sort of what you were mentioning. The more you look, the more you're going to find that people are doing wrong, and it's just depressing and frustrating and sad that this is what, the 10-year-old thinks that getting fingerprinted at Disneyland is the norm, and our students who we're trying to train to think critically are thinking that technology will set them free by surveilling them further and making them more subject to these asinine laws. And I just thought I had to share that.
Well, so I guess the question is, do we become more civilized if we become a nation of snitches? Is this technology as useful for observing abuses of authority as it is for observing people breaking the law? Because of course we have the police; they're already out there finding people who are breaking the laws. But watching the police has always been a problem. Watching government and authority has always been a problem. And so far, the technology hasn't been that great at that. For example, there was this couple in, I think it was Georgia, who lived at the bottom of a hill, and people would speed past their house very loud and very fast. So they put up their own speed gun, their own radar gun. They caught a cop speeding past their house. And he brought charges against them for stalking him. Because, of course, he has extraordinary recourse to the machinery of the state, and they have their radar camera. Maybe one more question, and then we're done? Yeah.
You're just talking about the onion router. I mean, that's ultimately traceable. I mean, because you can peel off layers and see eventually who, or just completely anonymized.
The question is the onion router completely anonymous? The onion router is largely defense against the kind of attack that you described, where you peel the onion layers off, because each one itself is cryptographically secure. Without getting into the math here, because there are a lot of people, as soon as you say it's cryptographically secured, it's like, and then we go to Mars, but each layer is cryptographically secured. There are, the big fear with the onion router is that you can probably make some valuable attacks on it if you control enough of the internet, or if you can surveil enough of the internet. And that's why these very ambitious surveillance programs are so worrisome.
I'm just curious about some other method of creating chatter or just chaff, throwing more hay into the haystack.
Is there another way of making more chaff? I would advise you to have a look at something called the Mixmaster Relay, which is a very good sort of proof of concept for anonymizing networks.
Okay.
Yeah?
Where you wouldn't expect to do that.
That's a great idea. Why not make a website called fingerprinted.com that lists the websites? You make it all blog it.
How would you vote if you're living in Canada?
I voted NDP in the last election. I helped kick out Sam Bolte, the corrupt heritage minister, who had taken all of her campaign contributions from the industry that she was regulating, just like Bev Oda has done. It's unheard of in Canadian politics. It's very American-style politics to take money from these people. And the heritage minister, Bolte, when we asked her, would you take a pledge that says you won't take money from an industry that you're likely to end up regulating in a ministerial portfolio, refused to take the pledge. Instead, she said, I will not be intimidated by EFF members and user rights zealots. But I mean, this is just amazing. And if they're meant to be on our payroll, they should be representing us. If she wants to be a lobbyist for the entertainment industry, let her be a lobbyist. If she wants to be a minister, she should be at least keeping up the pretense of impartiality.
Just a quick one. Very much enjoyed your presentation. Chomsky great Chomsky who shook up the tree. I guess he's going to die soon. Are you going to become the next?
Is Chomsky sick? He's old. I don't know what it would mean to be the next
We
Chomsky.
need you to carry the torch.
I hope to be the next Cory Doctorow.
Yeah, I like how you ended your presentation with, how can we fight back? But besides the onion router, it sounded like most of it was activism. But how are we? I knew about the example of that the Usenet is ephemeral, nothing will ever be stored anywhere because hard drives are too expensive. Oh, no, they're not. Right? What do you have advice for how we should navigate now?
The question is, how do you navigate spaces to stop this kind of post-facto revelation? So one thing we can do is we can just be aware of it. If you think of all of this stuff as being available subsequently to be aggregated and published, then you start to think about your world differently. Now, it's kind of sad that we feel that way, but just starting to think that way is important. But it's also important to start communicating and fostering an ethos of respecting one another's privacy. Right? We have telescopes, but we don't say that it's inevitable that they'll be pointed through our living room windows. Right? We don't say, well, he should have pulled the curtains. He deserved what he got. So we can start, and we've had them for hundreds of years, and we can stop treating it like an historical inevitability that every time a new technology comes along that lets us sniff, that someone will sniff, and we can at the same time avail ourselves of the tools that make us more sniff-proof. So we can buy curtains, and we can look with disapproval on people who point their telescopes through the window. Yeah, I'm relying on someone to tell me when we're out of time. Barry, are we out of time? Brian, are we out of time?
This will go on forever. But Cory has promised to sign a few books,
I
and
will.
we'll get to know people more individually. So a couple more questions then? And
Sure, a couple more questions. And I'll note for the record that although my books are on sale, you can also download them all for free from the internet. Yeah.
I wanted to ask if you have any insight on Google's growing power of all the search results that they're gathering and requesting by the FBI to expose some of that, whether they've done that or not, and the past event of AOL having some of their search results exposed.
So the question is, what about Google and its amazing ability to aggregate all this personal information, not just search results, right? Your email, your calendar, if you use their spreadsheet, what numbers you add up, and so on. I mean, everything. And given that AOL recently had this horrible data Valdez, what about that? What about Google? Are they gonna hemorrhage our search results? And I worry a lot about it. Google, for all its mantra of "don't be evil," for all that a lot of the people I know who work there are wonderful people, and for all that many of its products are brilliant, is not a company with a perfect record. It had this fantastically naive idea about China, that it could go into China and cooperate with totalitarian bureaucrats in blocking part of the internet for China, and that this would somehow cause Chinese people to want to be more democratic and evince a kind of soft revolution in China. Like, how's that working out for you? I particularly worry that Google has started to frame itself as a media company and really trying to get in bed with the entertainment industry. So we just had this ridiculous spectacle of not Verizon, Viacom sending 100,000 takedown notices to YouTube, indiscriminately taking down videos, including videos that they had no copyright interest in, where they just included them in this very wide dragnet. And Google could have sued Viacom for this, right? But they don't want to sue Viacom. They want to suck up to Viacom. They want to get licenses from Viacom. So they left their users to hang out there in the wind. And I much prefer that Google take the position that if you want to service a takedown notice, you can send your process server here. And if we catch you sending a bad takedown notice, we'll join with our customers jointly and sue you, and we'll recover our legal costs as the courts are beginning to allow people to do with bogus takedown notices. And that would make me feel a lot more sanguine about Google's ethical commitment to its customers. Google has a deeper problem that has nothing to do with its institutional will, and that's the technical problem of knowing what information it has. I was speaking to a friend who works at Google about the fact that the user agreement for Google Mail says that they won't promise you that they've deleted anything. So even if you delete your spam, they won't promise you that it's been deleted, or your non-spam. And I said, why is that? Is that because you guys want to data mine spam and see how it changes to make your spam filters better? He goes, there's a little of that. But the fact is, when you operate as many servers as we do, and everything is mirrored and backed up, and there are different parts of the world and copied and so on, we don't know what data we have. We don't know what data we've kept. If we keep it, we might not ever be able to delete it. And I think the answer is don't keep it. Last question, you, sir.
Speaking of Noam Chomsky, he doesn't believe, or he believes the official 9/11 story. What do you believe?
Okay, so do I believe the official 9/11 story? I'll tell you what I think. I think that there are so many unambiguously true sins to lay at the feet of the Bushies, right? Extraordinary rendition, suspension of habeas corpus, incredible, torture, extraordinary rendition, right? Incredible savage pork in Iraq, where they're funding mercenary armies who are murdering civilians and not subject to justice, where they're slashing social programs, selectively enforcing laws and punishing people who are parts of ethnic minorities and so on. Like, if that's not enough to damn them, what do the 747s in the World Trade Center have to do with anything? Like, I already have enough to hang them. Yeah. And I don't have to argue about whether or not they crashed 747s into the Pentagon, or whether, the Building 7 fell 20 seconds early or whatever. I mean, they lied about the war. They killed millions or a quarter of Iraq by one estimate. In civilian casualties. They've started a war on abstract nouns that will probably never end. They probably set the seeds in motion of crashing the US dollar and taking with it most of the currencies of the world. I mean, like, if that's not enough to hang the Bushies, what difference will the World Trade Center make? That's what I say.